It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are going to be discussing I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself by Marissa Crane. So I will go ahead and do the plot for this one, as Alexis is feeling under the weather. So we are in the future that liberals want. Prison abolition has been accomplished. The police have been defunded. There are no more local cops. And social order is maintained entirely via cancel culture, which is administered through a government organization that attaches shadows to you, additional shadows, for any crime. Real or perceived, no trials anymore. Basically, all you have to do is do something that might hurt people or that people might disapprove of on the internet, and the one government organization that still exists in the United States will come and staple a shadow to you. And this makes you a second-class citizen. There's all kinds of like sumptuary laws. In order to achieve this level of social control, there are cameras in absolutely everybody's houses. So you're not just being tracked through your smartphone. You're being
only if they have shadows. I think it's only if you have shadows. There's cameras all through your house if you have a shadow, extra shadows.
Bo's mom has them in her house, and she doesn't have a shadow, an extra shadow. So no, it's everybody.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So into this world, we find Chris, who is a brand new mother, and unfortunately, her wife Bo died in childbirth, and for the crime of killing her mother, the infant is given a second shadow straight out of the womb, and the story is about the difficulties of raising a child under these circumstances, and also of mourning one's deceased partner, and the sort of the 10-year arc of moving on with one's life and finding a new partner. Does that just about cover it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. Are there lesbians in this book?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Very, very gay book.
The main character is a lesbian. Her wife was a lesbian. The love interest is a lesbian. Or maybe bi. I don't know. This is a very gay book, though.
Lesbians, as far as the eye can see. Are there wizards?
Well, I feel like the president is kind of a wizard. And there are people going around stapling shadows to you.
Yes. No, the president, who is sort of like... he's kind of like if Trump was woke. He's sort of a...
Yeah.
He's like... I don't know if you remember the Dead Kennedys song California Uber Alles, which envisions a world in which then governor of California Jerry Brown becomes a dictator. It's that sort of vibe. The Firesign Theater also has a similar sketch in which a hippie dictatorship controls the world. And the great powers put aside their differences to bomb Nigeria with 10,000 hardbound copies of The Naked Lunch. And but yes, we'll call him a wizard in part because he can somehow attach additional shadows to people, or his agents can.
Yes. Yes.
And
he's sort of supernaturally charismatic.
Yes. And let's see here.
And they definitely fight.
They're definitely in conflict. So yeah, we'll call him a wizard. This is a Wizards versus Lesbians book. Why should you read this one?
If you want to feel sad.
We end up concluding that fans of psychological horror might enjoy this. I can't think of a reason. So this book, if you faithful listeners will recall The Book Eaters, which I said at the time was the worst book that we've done for this podcast. This book is very similar to The Book Eaters. And if you want...
Yeah, so if you thought we were being unfair towards the Book Eaters and you want something that's got a similar sort of bad mom vibe, but sympathetic, like the Book Eaters, and like a dystopian society...
It's like if as the Book Eaters was to something like Twilight, this book is to like a misery memoir, right? It's like it's one of those books, sort of those painful but inspirational books about overcoming personal tragedy that you get, except with a supernatural element just like barely tacked onto it. As the sort of the world is kind of a
and yes, and a bit of a sort of dystopian near future.
Yes, it's one of those day after tomorrow sci-fi stories. But the to its credit, actually, the book doesn't even try to explain it. Because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I thought that was a good choice.
It was a good choice, and so you're left to interpret it as a metaphor for the way that Chris, our hero, is seeing the world in her current state.
I think, honestly, if you like depressing literary fiction, but you're like, why can't this be a little bit more science fiction and have more lesbians, then you'll probably enjoy this book.
Indeed.
It very much reads like something that came out of an MFA.
Yes. It's not great. It's better written than The Book Eaters was. But it's not like, it's not like it's not, So Lucky, which is a thing, which is kind of the same sort of idea, like a real life tragedy that
we haven't actually covered So Lucky, but we should cover So Lucky, and then we could compare this to So Lucky, but yeah, which is a little unfair to this book, but yes, this is not Nicola Griffith.
It's not Nicola Griffith, but it's not like objectively terrible either. As to why you shouldn't read this book, I actually found this one harder going in some ways than The Book Eaters, even though it's shorter and less bad, precisely because it's less bad.
Which makes it harder to check out. It's real miserable, and it makes it harder to check out when, like, you can't get distracted by the writing.
Exactly. And Chris is like I have plenty of reasons for not wanting to spend time with Chris. And,
yes,
personal and political and all sorts of reasons. And I really did not enjoy the experience of being a part of this person's life. So, I can't recommend that you read this book, but if you're a very different person than I am and you would like to dip into somebody else's experience of like grief, paranoia, and like massive narcissism, then by all means. So
yes.
Content warnings. Obviously, the death of a loved one. Putting a gifted child into public school.
Pregnancy-related death.
Pregnancy-related death.
Also, like a whole lot of violence, mostly off screen. The
threats of all kinds of like violence and like threats of your children being taken away, and
pretty standard sort of dystopian police state kind of thing.
Yes.
Also mob violence.
Indeed. Although not particularly well drawn mob violence. And another candidate for like shittiest mom in the world. Yet another one.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah.
What is it with these books and terrible? Anyway.
Well, these books also tend to have terrible dads.
That is true.
Or father figures.
Weirdly, her dad is not as bad a parent as she is, but anyway.
No, though he did like. Well, we'll get to her relationship with her dad.
Yes.
We can actually talk about her relationship with her dad. So.
Why don't, unless I'm missing anything.
Spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone. Let's go to the spoiler zone. Okay.
Yeah.
Fuck. I hated this book.
Yeah, I suspected that you might, but I also thought that it would, produce an interesting discussion. So.
Yeah.
One of the things you said to me before we were doing the podcast was that you thought that this and The Book Eaters both came out of the experience of parenting during the pandemic.
Yeah. So like my taking this in combination with the Book Eaters and to a lesser extent some other books that we've read, I think having children is an incredibly traumatic experience for some people. Um,
Yes.
Particularly having children if you're not ready for it, if you're or having children and then something like that you're not prepared to handle happens, like your partner dying, or for example, a global pandemic, which like isolates you and leaves you without the support structure that people need if they're going to raise children. Um, and this also dovetails with like if you yourself had a bad childhood, if you yourself were sort of, and particularly if you yourself hadn't had a bad child that you haven't been able to resolve, and that or deal with or address, and if you're autistic, and because her dad is certainly autism coded here, and you know we're sort of left to interpret how much of that she's taken on herself and how much of that her daughter has. It's but like the if you this person like has Chris is not equipped to raise a child. She has like an emotional age of maybe 15.
Right. And at first you think that this is just grief, but then you really, as you sort of get more and more hints to her past, you realize that she never really ever had her shit together.
No, she never grew up. And
Did we even mention that Chris herself has an extra shadow?
no, we forgot to, but it's like, it sort of goes without saying because like this entire world is all about Chris's feeling that it's all about Chris's narcissism. Chris is your classic toxic narcissistic parent. She expresses it in a different way than the hero of the Book Eaters does. Because the hero of the Book Eaters is like, you know, I've suffered incredibly and it's everybody else's fault. And I will never apologize for anything I did because it's all justified because I've suffered terribly. Whereas in this case, the shadows symbolize shame and guilt. And our hero is the worst, you know, in the same way that like the hero of the Book Eaters used social justice language to justify her, you know, like, you know, hurt people thing. In this case, she uses social justice, you know, language to castigate herself. She talks about like how she's a social worker because, you know, it's the classic white savior thing to do. And then she also calls everybody who she doesn't like who is white and not the people who she does like that are white. Which, you know, you may have seen people do that in the wild. I certainly have. I may have been guilty of it myself at times. In a world where the justice system is entirely based on personal shame, social workers still exist. Do therapists? Are shadesters banned from working with them in case they make them feel better about themselves? Or does therapy simply not exist in this universe? I don't know. And so like, of course she has a shadow. You know, that's the point of the book. Like, that's the whole thing, is this entire, like, ludicrous situation that the United States has found itself in, is just her way of looking at the world and of her shame. I will say that like the structure of the book is such that you go through 3/4 of it without finding out why she has a shadow.
Yes. Though I don't know. To me, I was not. It was pretty heavily foreshadowed that it had something to do with kink.
Yeah, no, because kink is sort of one of the loci of her shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is another thing that sort of made me like, you know, made me feel like the closest analog to this thing that she's experiencing in the real world is like online cancel culture, because, you know, her like hurting her partner in the course of sex, which is what it is. Like she accidentally chokes out her partner while having sex with her while drunk. And then makes the mistake of calling an ambulance because you know, she thinks that she might have killed her when in fact all she did was render her unconscious. And this is immediately enough to get her shadowed. To to become a shadester, which is a really unfortunate word to have chosen as your.
Yes.
Anyway, but anywho,
Shadester to me very much reads like some badly translated thing, in an anime where they're trying to deal with. I think I read one where Chan was translated as stir.
That's exactly what I thought of. Yeah. And it's like unfortunately close to like
it
shyster.
has that sort of.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
And it's shadesters and non-shads or no shads. Nobody will ever call anybody something that's as difficult to wrap your mouth around as no shad. That's not a thing.
Right.
But the point being that, yeah, no, her guilt and her shame is like the absolute center of the world. And because she is a narcissist and because she has like the kind of attachment disorder that means that she can't handle anybody not being fully engaged in her and her business, which he's aware of, and which the book, lampshades frequently. She is like, that's part of the reason why I'm not like necessarily calling this book like, a moral atrocity, is because the book is aware that she's not good.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what interested me about this book, is that it's a real unpleasant read because you're spending this time with this real unpleasant person. But I feel like the book is very straightforward, that Chris is a bad parent who's made a lot of dumb mistakes and who continues to make a ton of just really poor decisions throughout her life.
She does, yes. Although, like, one does get the impression that she is supposed to learn and grow at the end. And
she really doesn't.
She doesn't, no. And that's an incredibly sort of depressing, mordant thing if that was the intention. But yeah, no, she does the classic thing of learning one lesson and then being like, all right, everything's fine now.
Right.
So I have a couple of things to talk about. So we go through like 80% of the book, as I said, with her not wanting to reveal or not revealing to the reader or to anybody else in her life why she got her shadow. And I was like, okay, what I assumed was happening was that, this is one of those cases where it's going to morally complicate our relationship with the point of view character by foregrounding her grief and her sadness and like making her a really sympathetic figure who we're rooting for, and then revealing the awful thing that she did and having to have us grapple with like, whether we can still like root for her. I don't think that's what the book was trying to do, actually.
No, because there's another character that the book is doing that with for Chris, not for the reader, which is Siegfried.
Yes. And even Siegfried does something which, like, I would argue is not... You could have made Siegfried do something much, much worse than that, if you really wanted to make your point. And
honestly, that's possibly my biggest beef with this book, is that it really should, it's trying to make a point about about how society can't condemn people forever, or it can, but there's no way to humanely condemn people forever without this leading to moral atrocity. That like prison abolition isn't going to do anything if you're just using public shaming. But the problem is that it's not willing to commit to this.
Yes.
It's not willing to have the sort of person who would be on, say, death row today. And that really undermines its message. The fact that, Siegfried did commit, accidentally cause his sister's death via selling drugs. But I really expected the reveal for Siegfried would be that like he'd shot his girlfriend or something.
Right, exactly. It would be...
Or his sister.
It would make much more sense that way. Because like...
And if there's one thing that reading tons of murder cases for my dissertation has really instilled in me, is that it's an extremely human thing to get really drunk or really angry and kill somebody. And, like, it's not a good decision, but it happens to a lot of people who are otherwise just leading fairly ordinary lives.
I'm afraid to say that I do listen to a few true crime podcasts, and there are some warning signs you can use to keep yourself safe from random murderers. For example, do not associate with anybody who owns a bird. Also, you shouldn't hang around with people who drink or do meth or both. Or rich people, or poor people, or seemingly normal people.
You know, and the book is not willing to commit. And that I thought was very disappointing.
Agreed. Like, I would have... It's like, if the point the book is trying... I mean, that is one of the points the book is trying to make. And if it was wanted to make that point, it should have... it should have made Siegfried do something, like, really difficult to forgive while still making him be this, great presence in their life. And B, they shouldn't have killed him immediately, upon us finding, justice should not have been done in that sense, because it's like, there's no, like, this universe lacks any sense of proportionality. Like,
well, I mean, to be fair, so does this, like, the actual universe.
Well, no, though, it doesn't, because, like, our current, not to this extent, because our current justice system does, punish people differently based on the crimes that they did. Now, the way that it does that is, like, unjust and racist.
Oh, I
and
just meant the universe in general, not our... I didn't mean our criminal justice system. I just meant our universe. Like,
yes.
bad things happen to good people all the time, and vice versa.
This is not me talking about, like, the way this fictional universe works karmically. I'm talking about how this fictional government agency,
this fictional society works. Right,
yeah.
But again, I think you're right that this is very much a story of sort of, internet cancel culture, which really can't tell the difference between, voluntary manslaughter and liked a problematic ship.
Yes, no, that is true. So, like, as a satire on cancel culture, it works really well that, like, you murder somebody, you get one shadow, you drop your baby, they come and take your baby away, you kick a dude in the balls who's trying to rape you, you get the same punishment as somebody who killed somebody. So yeah, no, with the Book Eaters, we sort of struggled to see if there was satire in there. There was absolutely satire in here, but it's kind of swamped under the general, like, miasma of self-loathing and self-involvement that our point of view character exists in.
Yeah.
So, there is a point, but, but I wish that it had chosen to make that point differently. So I want to talk about the kid. This book has a very hard time telling how, keeping track of how old a child is. In fact, it does exactly the same narcissistic thing as the Book Eaters did, where because the parent of this child is a child herself, she is incapable of treating the child as a child and insists upon treating the child as her peer, and that includes really not having any sense of, like,
yes,
what a child is capable of at any given point in their developmental cycle, like even a very gifted child, which this one is. And this is one of those things where it's like, it stops being about how delusional the narrator is and starts being about how delusional the author may or may not be about what children are like. Because...
yeah, which it's a little too bad. And I felt like that was a little too bad because you're right. Like, one of the things that's really well depicted is the way that Chris is not treating her child in developmentally appropriate ways. She's, talking to her child like an adult in times when that's inappropriate. And dumping things on her child that her child is, is like when her kid is like 5 and 6. And that could work really well, except that, and it's hard to tell if this is because we're so much in Chris's head. Like, this is extremely tight first/second person, because she's narrating mostly to the kid.
No, she's narrating to her dead wife.
Oh, she's narrating to her dead wife. You're right. But anyway, that always makes it hard, because I feel like the author has done a very good job of capturing a certain kind of person, and very much immersing you in that kind of person's brain. And so it is hard to tell sometimes, is this the author getting something wrong, or is this the narrator getting something wrong? The narrator who's the protagonist. And with the kids' developmental stages, I feel like that's particularly difficult, because it makes it harder to realize how inappropriate some of her behavior towards the kid is.
Yeah. This kid is very precocious, both mentally and physically. Try giving a 5-year-old child an electric guitar. See how well that goes. It's not even like this child prodigy, playing Mozart at the age of 8 thing. First of all, 5. Second of all, not enough physical strength to play that instrument at that point. Period. It's like,
also like hand size,
and instrument size,
ability to reach
this
everything.
This kid is going to be as big as the guitar. It doesn't work. Maybe she bought her kid a half-size guitar. The sumptuary laws governing shadesters only seem to involve going to physical grocery stores. She can go to bars whenever she wants. She can buy whatever she needs. Where is all this money coming from? I know it's a metaphor, but I'm sorry. That's the sort of thing where it's like, it feels like this child is a fantasy of, and again, this works very well with the theme. This child is a fantasy of the most special, this child will fix all of my problems and will do everything that I ever wanted to do but wasn't able to do, kind of, putting all of my expectations on it, except because this narrator's feelings affect the reality of the world around her, which is not explicit in the book, but just happens. Mm-hmm. Like, this child is literally capable of doing things that a child her age should not be able to do. And is also like skipping developmental stages so quickly that she's like being a truant and hanging out in the park smoking a joint at the age of 9.
Yes.
Incidentally, she's being a truant, hanging out and smoking a joint in the park with her cool friends at the age of 9 in a surveillance state where if you do anything even slightly wrong in front of the camera, an agent shows up at your door 10 minutes later. But no agents show up for this, even though there's one who's specifically keeping an eye on them because he's angry. The child breaks the logic of this world. And
yes.
And it makes it much harder. I started out liking the book okay, but when we got to the kid starting to grow up, it became so intolerable, because it really destroyed my faith in the author knowing what they were doing and keeping in a consistent, universe. Because the kid just bends everything.
Yeah, and I thought that when I was reading this, I thought what the author was trying to do was have the get you invested in the coolest kid in the universe, so that you will be crushed when, society eventually comes to crush her too. And so the ending felt like a little bit of a cop-out there, even though it also came as a relief.
Yeah, but again, I feel like, there's again this tension where it's like we're building what the author thinks is happening is that we're building sympathy and caring in order to make the bad thing even worse, but because this child becomes a rebellious, sullen, hormonal teenager at the age of 8 or 9 rather than 15, by the time that they're deciding that it is in fact a good thing to go live with her ex-wife's wealthy parent, which they should have fucking done 10 years ago. The
Yep.
I don't care about any of you anymore. I don't care about this daughter who isn't a human
Yeah.
being. I don't care about this mom who is an asshole. And I don't care about the new love interest because she doesn't have a personality. You know, like this book has the most like violent U-hauling we've seen.
Well, and honestly, she's also kind of an asshole.
And is also kind of, but even to the extent that we see her, you know.
I mean, yeah, she very much sort of, she's definitely a bit of a blank slate, but the biggest thing that she does in terms of having a personality is lie about the fact that she dated the dead wife for a while. And I mean,
which is the dumbest fucking subplot.
Right, because like kind of course she did. This is a tiny lesbian community. Of course everybody dated everybody.
Right. A tiny lesbian community
and,
in any town USA. We don't know like what this place is like. It has a waterfront, it has a beach, that's all we know. But anyway, yes.
Right, and I mean the thing is that I feel like what the subplot was supposed to do was be this turning point so that Chris could move on a little bit from her dead wife, because it's been like 9 years at this point.
Yeah, no, that's clearly, she's there to be the person that Chris moves on with. Nothing else about her matters except that there has to be some sort of drama.
Right, well, but it's not even just drama. It's specifically drama as in, no, I too dated your ex-wife, and so you have to process your feelings. You cannot move on with me until you have processed your feelings with your ex-wife. And given
But that would have been true whether she dated the ex-wife or not.
Right, but I think that there had to be a better reason for Chris to completely flip out.
Right.
Because it couldn't just, again, it could have just been that Chris, whatever the love interest's name is, I've already forgotten, is like, no, you really need to move on. This is getting a little bit creepy, actually. And that could be why Chris flips out.
Yes.
But that is not. Michelle, that was her name.
Her name is Michelle, yes. She's, God love us, save me from a world where everybody I know is some kind of social worker or teacher. But regardless, so the reason that she meets Michelle is that her dad basically, kidnaps her and forces her to go to an underground support group, because he's very, very...
Well, partly because he's guilty for completely cutting her off. He feels guilty for completely cutting her off after she got a shadow. Like, that's why she hasn't talked to her dad in years. Or at least months. It's hard. Time is kind of fuzzy.
He hung up on her, and then she didn't follow up with him for years, and then ignored every attempt that he made to get in touch with her.
Yes.
When the first apology.
Then again, if you find out your kid has got, if you find out that your kid has gone to jail and you hang up on them, that is actually a pretty shitty thing to do.
Oh yeah, 100%. No, I'm not saying. I'm more saying that if I wish that I would get the kind of apology message that she gets from her, problematic parent, and turns up her nose at.
That's absolutely true. Her dad puts so much into apologizing in a way that no shitty parent I've ever encountered has even occurred to.
And dad has trouble with his feelings and with expressing his feelings because he's autistic. He's actually a pretty well-drawn character, I think. And that he's annoying but not bad. Sort of a well-meaning oaf in a certain way.
Yeah, and you can see how he made the mistake of hanging up on his daughter when he finds out that she's had a horrible life occurrence, and understand how he could believably feel really bad about that and be trying to make amends for several years.
Yes. And so yeah, no, that's sort of one of the interesting things about this book is that with the exception of the government agent who really doesn't actually play as the role in the book that we're led to expect he will.
Right, because she starts blackmailing him.
Yes, which is kind of fun because it's like, I mean, I don't know about you, but so she meets the government agent in a kink class that she takes her wife to because she's a masochist and her wife isn't kinky, but she wants to introduce her wife to kink, and she knows that her wife likes going to classes and stuff, which is, again, that's a nice, well observed touch to try to to get with somebody on their level if they're the kind of person who enjoys like improving community events. But like this dude, I immediately assumed that he was just lying about being gay so he could stay in the sexy room when he said that. I don't know about you, but the book doesn't even consider that as a possibility, which is weird.
Well, I mean, the thing is that it doesn't, to some degree, it doesn't matter. He went to the kink class.
And that in and of itself, the fact that he was in the sex shop is enough for him to get canceled.
Right, exactly. Like that is the thing. That is the thing that she can effectively blackmail him about. It doesn't actually matter if he's gay or not. He went to the kink class.
Yeah.
And presumably whatever, and I felt like it was effective not because he was actually gay, but because whatever he was ashamed of, because you're right that shame is like everybody's motivator here. Whatever he was so ashamed of is connected to the kink class, and he doesn't want to be, reminded. And possibly that's just that he was staying in there watching.
Yes. No, I think you're right about that. But it's funny that it just doesn't ever occur to her that he might be lying about being gay, particularly because the next thing that he does is non-consensually sandpaper her wife, which strikes me as a relatively heterosexual thing to do. But but yes, so the government agent sort of, after possibly killing her friend, who we think should have done something worse than he actually did. I also appreciate that, like, the one sort of decent, white dude character who's not her father is fridged for her emotional development. I always like it when books do that.
That was a nice touch, and it's very much a classic fridging.
It really is, yeah. But yeah, no. Besides possibly, and we never actually find out, being responsible for that, he just sort of exists as a general threatening sort of miasma. But also, like, one gets the sensation, and this is actually sort of carried through in the thing that I was complaining about the about smoking a joint, about her kid smoking a joint in the park, is that the panopticon becomes less and less effective and less real as she starts to heal.
Yes.
Like, she gets away with stuff that, based on what we were told before, she should not even be able to get close to getting away with as we get near the end of the book.
Yes, and part of that is because the panopticon is a metaphor.
Yes, exactly.
Also, though, pragmatically, at this point, so many people have had shadows that presumably, like, the U.S. government cannot keep up with all of them. And so it also makes sense that Panopticon is starting to slack off a bit and go more for random, just spotting and, random punishment, because so many people have shadows at that point.
Right. And, like, also given the level of surveillance that is posited in the early book, we probably also have the liberal dream of full employment at this point, because absolutely everybody who's not a shadester has to be employed watching shadesters. So
or the people watching them are just, getting, like, slacking off more and more and more and more and more.
All right, because there's absolutely no way for them to do this jobs, and it does make sense with Chris's character that she would be sufficiently checked out of, like, any political discourse or like the news, that she wouldn't be aware that this was happening.
Right. And I mean, the thing is that the one thing that drives home to her that, she really is being watched all the time, is fairly early on when she covers up all the cameras in her house so that she can masturbate. And you could have probably a pretty easy computer program flag when the cameras have been completely covered up.
Yes,
So So, like, for all she knows.
One thing that would make the people who work there pay attention is, watching people have sex. So presumably you're going to be watched a lot more closely when you're either about to or are having sex than at any other point.
Right.
Shout out to the NSA agent watching me edit this in the nude.
So I have a question. Did you experience this via audiobook or via physical book?
Audiobook, so of course I don't have any additional materials.
Well, so I was going to say, how did they handle the word searches in the audiobook?
So there's sections that are just called pop quiz.
Interesting.
And, so how was it done in the book itself?
I think there's also pop quizzes in there's also pop quizzes in the book, but occasionally, interspersed, there's find and circle the following words in the word search, and it's things like, freedom or safety or guilt or whatever. And of course, you can never find the words in the word search. It's, usually they have fragments of the words, but not the words themselves.
Oh, they just didn't include those, which is interesting because the audiobook says unabridged.
Well, it is lying to you.
Yes. The sort of the paratextual elements of the book are, I think, probably the strongest thing about what's going on. They're a little on the nose, obvious, but
they are a little on the nose, but they make the book a little bit. I feel like they help develop the book's voice, and so I would definitely in that case recommend reading this as a paper book or ebook rather than an audiobook if you have that capability.
Yeah, the performance is not super great also. I would, I think that that helps bring home sort of the intentionality of the idea that Chris is essentially a teenager in her mind. She is still in school. She was a social worker in school, after she got out of school. And so she's just never been outside of those particular social dynamics. I do enjoy that taking the kid out of school and homeschooling her is presented as the correct decision, even though it's seen as giving in to teachers who don't want to deal with the kid, because
I had mixed feelings about that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I think we're not going to settle the subject of whether of homeschooling is a vexed question. Put it that way.
Right, it is. No, it super is, and no, the main reason homeschooling is the sort of thing that is absolutely necessary for some people, and for other people is a way of locking them into abusive situations. And the thing with the kid, who I think doesn't actually get her name until part 3 in the book.
Yeah.
For the longest time, she's just called the kid, and then you find out that her name is Bear.
Yes, which is a name that you give an infant, a nickname that you give an infant. Right. But anyway, yes.
So, and the thing is that for Bear, it really could be either, right? Because she really needs an environment that's not horrible public school. But at the same time, none of the adults in her life have convinced me that they're going to do a good job of providing a stable environment for her if she has no other way of socializing and making friends.
Yes, particularly because she's about to move away from the friends that she's already made to this isolated country property where they're going to live off the grid, and her mom is okay, here I go with my 2 best friends, my lover and my child.
Right.
Right. I don't think that Bear is in for a good time here, and I think that this probably isn't the last time that she's running away from home.
Yes.
As you said, this book is really depressing because even if Chris thinks that it has a happy ending, it absolutely does not.
Right. No, it's got that. It's got that thing where Chris thinks that they're triumphantly driving off into the sunset or whatever, and it's just so grim.
Yes.
Especially for the kid.
Yeah. No, I I completely agree. And yeah, no, I do think that I think the book is smarter than that. But I also, just the way that it treats Bear generally confuses and upsets me.
Yeah.
You know, there are no bad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Marissa
they really cannot figure out.
Marissa, sorry, Chris. That is the author. Chris. Chris is one of those people who has zero boundaries. Like, you know, you're ride or die with me, or I hate you. And
yeah. Which is the sort of thing which is why she invites a random guy to just like live in their house, like her random park drinking buddy.
Yeah, with her small child. Yeah. Also, nothing is ever made of the fact that she's a heavy drinker, and nobody says anything about it, and it's never mentioned as possibly a problem. Even, I mean,
it
also
is so obviously
like,
a problem, though.
And she's like so guilty about this thing that she did to her partner while she was drunk, and it never once crossed her mind that maybe the drinking was the problem.
Right.
And it's like we are left to draw our own conclusions about that. But you know, I've read too many books where the book doesn't know that drinking is a problem, that I'm like, eh.
But the thing is that drinking causes so many, like, she makes so many bad decisions while drunk, and there's so many times where she's like, you know, where she goes off to get drunk, and I'm just going, why are you doing this to yourself? Why? That this is a really good sort of the author is dead kind of book, because it's done such a great job of giving you the very tightly focused perspective of this one awful person, that it genuinely does not, like, it genuinely does not matter what the author has intended. So much of this book is very easy to sort of parse, you know, what's going on, like the drinking, that it doesn't matter whether or not the author's aware of it. It is clear that is a thing that is going on that is causing problems for her in her life.
Yeah, no, completely agree. You know, there's so many like it all lines up. It is like incredibly easy to read the text. Like, you know, the first, you know, it's obvious that she's not going to be a good parent, but like the way that she deals with her cat, like, is, you know, sort of like, oh, you know, oh, the cat wants to go outside, I'll let the cat go outside and become a feral cat.
Yeah. Period.
You know, and then I'll get really sad about it because the cat didn't come back. Keep your cats inside.
Yes. Right. And so and you're right, and which is extremely good foreshadowing for exactly the kind of parent she's going to be, which is to encourage her child to go off and make bad decisions and then be extremely sad when there are consequences.
Yes. I will also, the fact that she's parasocial with her mail carrier. Speaking as a mail carrier, that's... Speaking as a mail carrier who has experienced many things that if I had not been in uniform, I would have reacted either very rudely or violently to things that people said or did. You know, it's a sign.
Guys, be polite to your mail carrier.
I've been bitten. I've been threatened. I've been groped. I've been flashed. And only one of those was by a dog. Your mail carrier is not your friend. You don't get to be possessive about your mail carrier.
Oh, God. Yes. Your mail carrier is a government employee. Please just be polite to them.
Yes, thank you. There are a few... God. She is going to live with the woman who, when she and her wife were getting married, put her hand up Chris's shirt and said, "Don't worry, I'll share her," to her. She's taking her child to live with this woman.
Right. This is what I mean.
There's so many little notes that are just like really clench the horror around you, you know, as the book progresses.
Right. I agree with you that the kid developmental stuff is really poorly handled, but I actually think this is a quite well-written, depressing horror novel.
Yes.
Like, masquerading as like, somebody's MFA novel.
Did you catch that when the kid goes missing, when she's like one of the many times that she goes missing, that she calls the Panopticon agency to help find her kid?
Yes.
After being incredibly paranoid about them taking away her kid, and they're like, and because they're being the cops at that point, they're like, by the way, the whole it has to be 24 hours thing, again, that is with missing adults, not missing small children. This book has no idea how old this child is at any given point. They should have shelved this book in the horror section. That way I would have known what to expect. Man. So, I'm not a horror kind of guy. Like, I don't intentionally subject myself to unpleasant experiences usually. I don't get anything out of it. But I think that if maybe we'll go back, maybe I'll put in a jingle at the beginning being like, if you like psychological horror, then that might be a reason to read this book. Yeah.
And again, I do not know whether or not it was intentional, but I don't actually care because this book functions really well as that, and is, this is not something where I'm working real hard to read against the text.
It's like every time when we're struggling to say, is this book satire? Does this book have something to say? And like, that's us interrogating the text to see whether it would support that reading. And in this case, it absolutely does.
Right.
Like, I think there's an entirely cogent reading of this book where 99% of what's going on is her paranoid fantasy. And it's like the thing. Oh, speaking of the kid, it's like, we've established that the shadows represent shame, right?
Right.
That's pretty clear.
And not just internal shame, but also like public shaming.
Internal shame, public shaming. And it's like, this child is given her shadow at birth because her mother died giving birth to her. And like, the idea that guilt could come from inside the child and not from her mom, like, even as she's railing
that's
against...
why it's shame and not guilt.
Right.
Because, she's railing against it, but fundamentally she is unable to forgive her child for killing her wife.
Yeah. And it's like, even though she never says that, she never acknowledges it, she always says the opposite of that. Like, the fact of it is literally attached to the child's body. It didn't get there any other way.
Right. And you're right that, like, so much of the shadows really is less reflecting society and more reflecting Chris. So another good scene, I thought, was the scene where, she and Siegfried are drinking and talking about how, now finally we white people are going to have to understand what it's like to have to give your kids the talk. And the way that which again, I thought was a really well depicted scene of these people sort of patting themselves on the back for finally being oppressed enough to understand what it's like to be black, while also, being good enough white liberals that they have to, acknowledge their previous privilege.
Yeah, no, I remember that. It felt incredibly masturbatory.
Right, and the thing is that, to me, it didn't feel masturbatory. Again, it felt masturbatory on the part of the characters.
Yes. The author is dead.
So
we have no idea what the author is doing to themselves.
Right. But again, I thought one of the ways in which this book works is by being an extremely mean, but from the inside, skewering of, the social justice people of basically the entire spectrum, from the sort of tepid left to the much more radical left.
Yeah, no, I think that you're 100% correct there. And I felt skewered. I didn't personally feel skewered, but
no, me neither. I mostly, but it was definitely an, oh wow, I am more annoyed with you guys than I was even before.
Yeah.
Especially because at no point in the book does she ever give her daughter the talk or anything like it. Like, she's flat out encouraging her daughter to pick fights with, powerful people.
She's a tremendously irresponsible parent.
Right.
If parent is even the word.
Because she very much, because she's, she's led this fairly tame life and found herself being a low status criminal solely from some BDSM. And, but like does not have the backbone, is way too much weighed down by her own shame and social awkwardness to be any sort of like cool rebel. And so I really feel like a lot of what's going on with the kid, including possibly some of the weird developmental stuff, is that she's really pushing the kid towards being the cool rebel that, she can't be. And like having the kid live out her fantasies. Even when 100%. It's completely developmentally inappropriate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. She rewards the kid for doing like shit that's under the circumstances of the society in which she believes that she lives, like unbelievably dangerous and stupid.
Right. And that even if it weren't under this kind of society, often wouldn't be appropriate for an 8 or 9-year-old.
Yes, correct. Correct. It's like, I'm all for this idea of, like, oh, the world is broken, we must rebel. But and as I said in like in the last episode, I was like, we have to find that place of pushing back against societal expectations ourselves. But the key thing about that is that you want to do that when you're at least grown up enough that you can survive on your own. And when you're not responsible for someone else. Right, exactly. It's like you're not, don't make child soldiers, even like, I think this is something that we can all agree on, like, even in the pursuit of the very best.
This is absolutely not something we can all agree on. I feel like one of the things that I've picked up very much from reading these books is that this is not something we can all agree on.
No, don't make child soldiers. Do not make child soldiers. If children have to become soldiers because they have no other choice, that's one thing. But
right. But you should not be encouraging your children. Do not raise your children to be heroes.
Yes. Prepare your children for the potential necessity of becoming a hero, but do not raise your children.
Just give your children the tools necessary to be whatever kind of hero they need to be when they need to be it, and don't push them to hurry that up.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. No. This made a very good companion piece to We Know the Devil in a certain way.
Right. And honestly, in another kind of weird way, to the Nightbird's Feather, and that this is very much from the point of view of the parents of those children.
Indeed. Yes. So, do you think that we have now successfully exercised this book? I feel
like we have successfully exercised this book to whatever extent we were ever going to be able to. And I don't actually know what we're doing next. Because it's going to be like, possibly it's going to be the Salvation Gambit, but we have got like a month of Hagim and other things coming up. So like, who knows? Who knows what I will read in the interim?
We're going to be taking a break from recording at this point, but you will experience no break in episodes because we're buffered well into the fall. So.
Yes.
Yes, but I know what's going to happen the episode after the next episode, which will be stakes. So stay tuned for that.
Yes! Stay tuned. Mm-hmm. Bye!
All right. Bye-bye.